Hello and a very good morning to all Newsline viewers. I'm Neha Bhan. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of this hour. We begin by telling you what's been happening on the Israel-Hamas war front.
The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Now, the war between Israel and Hamas has entered its 68th day. Let's get you the latest update from the war front. United Nations General Assembly votes to demand a Gaza ceasefire. Over three-quarters of the 193-member General Assembly backed the move. Biden warns Israel is losing support by its indiscriminate bombing of the enclave. Israel continues to pound areas in central Gaza and the enclave's south. Israel begins pumping seawater into Hamas tunnels. Over 18,412 people have lost their lives in the Gaza war so far. The United Nations on Tuesday urged an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. More than three-quarters of the 193-member General Assembly backed the move, which had been vetoed by the United States in the Security Council last week. India voted in favor of the ceasefire resolution in the UNGA's emergency session on Tuesday. The resolution for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire passed with 153 members voting in favor, 10 voting against and 23 abstaining.
I used my recent attendance at the Doha Forum and every other platform I can to encourage cooperation among states with the same singular goal in mind: to make peace for all. In the name of humanity, I ask you all once again, stop this violence now.
A ceasefire means one thing and one thing only: ensuring the survival of Hamas, ensuring the survival of genocidal terrorists committed to the annihilation of Israel and Jews. This is no secret. Hamas's charter makes this clear, and Hamas leaders have publicly stated that October 7th was just a rehearsal. A ceasefire is a death sentence for countless more Israelis and Gazans. By voting in favor of this resolution, you are supporting the survival of jihadist terror and the continued suffering of people of Gaza. The exploitation of the Palestinians has made the UN a moral stain on humanity. Why are you continuing to allow them to make the United Nations irrelevant?
And indeed, there are aspects of this resolution that we do support. We agree that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire and requires urgent and sustained attention, that civilians desperately need food and water and shelter and medical care, that a devastating number of innocent people have been killed, and that civilians must be protected, consistent with international humanitarian law. In addition, we support the release of all hostages immediately and unconditionally. Any ceasefire right now would be temporary at the best and dangerous at worst. Dangerous to Israelis, who would be subject to relentless attacks, and also dangerous to Palestinians who deserve the chance to build a better future for themselves, free from Hamas.
United States President Joe Biden warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, stating that Israel risked losing support from the international community due to its indiscriminate bombing of the Gaza Strip. While addressing a 2024 re-election campaign fundraiser in Washington, Biden emphasized that Israelis cannot say no to a Palestinian state and urged Netanyahu to avoid repeating mistakes made by the U.S. after 9/11. Drawing parallels with the U.S. war in Afghanistan, he remarked, "There are many of the things we did." Biden characterized Netanyahu's government as the most conservative in the country's history and urged him to change this government specifically, signaling, in fact, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right national security minister who opposes a future two-state solution. There, Joe Biden, the United States president, characterizing Netanyahu's government as the most conservative in the country's history and also urging him to change this government, specifically singling out Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the far-right national security minister. Now, these remarks from Biden coincided with increasing pressure from other Western governments calling for a halt to the relentless Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip. A Wall Street Journal report on Tuesday said that Israel's military has initiated the pumping of seawater into the tunnel network allegedly used by Hamas in Gaza. Citing U.S. officials briefed on Israeli military operations, the report indicates that this flooding strategy with water from the Mediterranean Sea is part of a broader effort by Israel to destroy the tunnels. The tunnel system, reportedly extending for 300 miles, is currently under assessment by the IDF for the potential use of thick blast doors. Now, this action has garnered criticism with concerns raised about its environmental impact and the potential exacerbation of freshwater scarcity for Gazans. Several officials from the Biden administration have expressed apprehension, suggesting that using seawater may not be effective and could jeopardize Gaza's freshwater supply. Regarding the report, U.S. President Joe Biden declined to directly answer a question on the matter. The Israeli Defense Forces announced that its troops recovered the bodies of 2 hostages seized by Hamas gunmen on the 7th of October. Aiden Zechariah, 27, is one of the people captured of the Noah music party in just outside Gaza. In fact, he was found by Israeli forces inside Gaza. Chief Military Spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said the body of Warrant Officer Ziv Dado was also found in Gaza during the fighting with Hamas terrorists. Listen in.
IDF Special Forces recovered the bodies of 2 Israeli hostages during a complex hostage rescue operation in Gaza. 27-year-old Eden Zechariah, who was taken hostage by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival, and 36-year-old Command Sergeant Major Ziv Dado, who was taken hostage while on active duty. Sadly, we did not reach them in time. Our special forces located the bodies of the hostage inside an underground infrastructure in a densely populated area in Gaza. Hamas is holding our people hostage in brutal conditions while hiding among and under the people of Gaza. Among and under the people of Gaza. This makes our hostage rescue operation in Gaza complex, but it will not deter us from our mission, our duty to rescue our hostages from Hamas.
More than 6,600 Palestinian children have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza since the 7th of October. Thousands more are missing under the rubble and relentless bombardment. Many of these children are now under the guardianship of distant relatives, friends, or even strangers, facing a reality where their lives are forever altered. Israeli Sharon Alano survived 52 days as a hostage in Gaza with her two little girls before she was released in an Israel-Hamas swap deal. But she fears for the life of her husband, who's still in captive in the bombarded Palestinian enclave. Take a look.
Sharon Aloni Cuneo, along with her two young twins, spent a harrowing 52 days as a Hamas hostage in the Gaza Strip. And in the first interview since her release, she told Reuters her thoughts were now with her husband, David, who is still held captive.
3 days before we were released, they separated David from us. They took him into a different hiding place. And since then, I don't know what is happening to him. The girls are torn. I'm torn. He's been my partner for 10 years. He's my other half and the love of my life. He's the father of my girls who are asking every day, "Where's Daddy? Where's Daddy?" I need to explain to them that he is still there.
Aloni Cuneo was one of 240 people taken hostage on October 7th by Hamas gunmen, who burst through the border with Israel and killed 1,200 people. The militants who attacked her kibbutz set fire to our house and took her away at gunpoint after she climbed out the window. She was taken across the border with her husband David and one of their twins. Their second daughter was held separately in Gaza for 10 days before they were reunited in captivity.
Every minute we're waiting is like a Russian roulette. Will they live through the day or not? And the conditions are difficult. Conditions that no one needs to live in, especially not children or adults without medicine. We saw that many have already lost their lives in captivity, so each moment is critical. And we need to do everything to put the aim of releasing all hostages prior to anything else.
Aloni Cuneo said her group of hostages were held above ground and moved a few times. But with memories still raw and with her husband still inside, she declined to go into details. A 7-day truce saw more than 100 hostages released. The rest are still being held as Israel bombards Gaza, vowing to take out Hamas. According to local health authorities, more than 18,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the start of fighting. Now back at home with her twin 3-year-olds, Julie and Emma, Aloni Cuneo pleads for the remaining 137 hostages to be freed.
There's a lot of families without a father, without a daughter, without a brother, without a grandfather, grandmother, mother. Everyone had, it's like 138 families there. That needs to come back now. You have to do everything you can to bring them back now.
A representative from the World Health Organization has expressed grave concerns about the healthcare situation in Gaza, stating that only 11 partially functioning hospitals remain out of the previous 36. The rapid decline in the health system from 36 functional hospitals to 11 in just 66 days is alarming. The WHO representative emphasized the critical importance of preserving all healthcare facilities, pledging for their protection amid ongoing airstrikes and ground attacks. Despite the Israeli military's order for Palestinians to move to safety in Rafah, an airstrike in the southern Gaza Strip reportedly resulted in the tragic death of at least 20 people. The continuous violence exacerbates the already dire health crisis in the region. We now slip into a short break, but we also leave you with a special documentary on why India did not retaliate after 26/11 terror attack. Don't go anywhere. Up next is a lot more.
The scale of the attack was something that we were surprised at. David Hadley was a double agent. The Americans did not want him to be fully exposed, so all that he probably shared with the Americans was not shared with us in terms of intelligence. If we had that, I'm sure that we would have been able to deal with the situation far better.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9+. Download now.
Welcome back. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faced the biggest parliamentary test of his premiership when lawmakers vote on his divisive plan to send asylum seekers to live in Rwanda. The outcome hangs in the balance as approximately 30 Conservative MPs threatening rebellion could sway the decision. Listen in.
Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing the biggest test in Parliament of his premiership so far, with lawmakers on Tuesday voting on his plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. It could be defeated if about 30 Conservative MPs rebel, and that would not only be a huge embarrassment, but also put Sunak's premiership on the line. The scheme was agreed to back in 2022 under Boris Johnson. But a month ago, the UK Supreme Court rejected the Conservative government's plan on the grounds that Rwanda is an unsafe place to send asylum seekers after they arrive by small boats to England's southern coast. Sunak reacted by agreeing to a new treaty with Rwanda and brought forward the bill, a piece of emergency legislation seeking to override any domestic and international human rights law that prevents the scheme from going ahead. The legislation has deeply divided his party. Moderates worry about Britain breaching its human rights obligations, while the far right says it doesn't go far enough, with some calling for a full rewrite of the legislation on Monday. Defeat would severely weaken Sunak's hold over his party. No government has lost a vote at this earlier stage in the parliamentary process since 1986. And stopping boat arrivals has been one of Sunak's main priorities since he replaced Liz Truss as Prime Minister last year. Around 29,000 asylum seekers arrived this year, about one-third less than in 2022, but they remain a highly visible symbol of the government's failure to control Britain's borders, a key promise of campaigners for Brexit.
Donald Trump continues to lead the race for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, securing over half of the party's voter support. Recent opinion polls reveal. Now, Trump has been impeached twice, tried to thwart the peaceful transfer of power after losing the 2020 presidential election, faces scores of charges in multiple criminal cases, and his critics warn he is plotting to rule as an autocrat. Yet, he could still run to the White House. Here's why.
The election of 24 is the single most important election in the history of our country.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been impeached twice, tried to thwart the peaceful transition of power after losing in 2020.
We will never concede.
And faces scores of charges in multiple criminal cases.
I am being indicted for you.
But with less than a year to go until the U.S. election,
make America great again.
Trump currently stands a better chance at returning to the White House than at any point since he left office.
Incredible people. Thank you.
He leads his rivals for the Republican presidential nomination by nearly 50 points in national opinion polls. Here's 4 reasons why he could win the November 2024 election against Democratic incumbent Joe Biden. The White House argues the economy is in good shape. Unemployment is down to a near historic low of 3.9%, compared to 6.3% when Trump left office. Inflation is cooling. But with wages not keeping up to the cost of essential goods and services, many voters don't believe it. And opinion polls show voters by a large margin see Republicans as better stewards of the economy. Trump also speaks to the worries, real or not, that many white Americans have in a country that's becoming more diverse and culturally progressive. There's a sense that some of the key benchmarks of American life, owning a home, a decent wage, and a college education, are becoming further from reach. Polls show voters are worried about crime and nervous about the flow of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally. Trump is adept at harnessing those fears. Democrats and critics in Trump's own party argue he's unfit for office. But at least half of Republicans surveyed by Reuters Ipsos earlier this year said they would have no problem voting for Trump even if he were convicted of a crime. The former president can also point to his time in office and argue the machinery of government largely functioned, if at times chaotically. Despite heavy government investment in infrastructure, clean energy, and chip manufacturing, the White House has not been able to persuade much of the public that Biden's job creation policies have made a difference to their lives. There are also two foreign wars dividing Americans. Trump's America First message could resonate with voters wary of more involvement in Ukraine or Israel.
I could be dictator again.
But Trump does remain deeply unpopular in many parts of the country. And his fiery rhetoric could turn off moderate Republicans or independent voters. If he becomes the nominee, it could also provoke a high turnout for Democrats against him.
As per reports coming in, United States President Joe Biden is unlikely to visit India as the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations next month. This comes months after U.S. Ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, had said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi invited President Joe Biden to be the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations. However, there was no comment on the invitation being extended by the Indian government. A number of reasons are believed to be behind Biden's decision to not visit India. This includes Biden's focus on his re-election bid in the next year's presidential elections, especially with several showing Trump in the lead. The other probable reasons are that Biden wants to keep his attention to the Israel-Hamas war and other geopolitical crises. With Biden not expected to visit India in January, reports are also emerging that the Quad summit, which was scheduled to be held in India, will now be held in the later part of the year. In a major relief for former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, the Islamabad High Court acquitted the PMLN chief in the Al Azizia steel mills corruption case. This removes a big hurdle in Nawaz's way to contest the general elections scheduled for February 2024 and seek a fourth term as the Prime Minister. The appeal against Nawaz Sharif's conviction in the case filed by the National Accountability Bureau was heard by a division bench of the Islamabad High Court. Sharif's lawyer Amjad Parvez said that the prosecution had presented no evidence against Sharif and the burden to prove innocence could not be put onto the accused. In 2018, Sharif had been sentenced to 7 years in prison by an anti-graft court in the Al Azizia Mills corruption case. He was allowed to go to London on medical grounds in 2019. He lived there in exile for nearly 4 years and returned to Pakistan in October this year. Now, Egyptians have cast their ballots on the third and final day of a presidential election expected to give President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi a sweeping victory and a new 6-year term in the absence of real competition. Results are expected on the 18th of December. The election, which began on Sunday, is Sisi's third since taking power after the 2013 overthrow of Egypt's first popularly elected president, Mohamed Morsi. Sisi is expected to win by a landslide despite Egypt being gripped by various crises, including the Israel-Hamas war in neighboring Gaza and the country's worst ever economic crisis. In a shocking incident, a far-right Polish lawmaker extinguished Hanukkah candles using a fire extinguisher during a parliamentary event with the Jewish community. Now, he's labeled Hanukkah as satanic and claimed to be restoring normality. Take a look.
A far-right Polish lawmaker used a fire extinguisher to put out Hanukkah candles in the country's parliament on Tuesday. It happened during an event with members of the Jewish community. As Grzegorz Braun extinguished the flames, a woman asked the Confederation Party lawmaker what he was doing. He responded, "Those who take part in acts of satanic worship should be ashamed." Afterwards, Braun took to the podium in the chamber, where he once again described Hanukkah as satanic and said he was restoring normality. Braun's actions have set off a firestorm of outrage. "This is unacceptable and it must never happen again," said newly appointed Prime Minister Donald Tusk. "This is a disgrace." The incident took place just before a key vote on whether to approve Tusk. Speaker Shimon Havovnia excluded Braun from the sitting of Parliament and said he would inform prosecutors about his actions. He later said that Braun would lose half of his salary for 3 months and all parliamentary expenses for 6 months. Members of the Jewish community, including children, had gone to Parliament at Havovnia's invitation for annual Hanukkah celebrations. Those who were present during the incident reported difficulty breathing after being covered in powder from the extinguisher. Braun's Confederation Party won 18 seats in the October 15 election, less than expected. The party said in a post on social media platform X that it condemned Braun's behavior.
Moving on now, the UK's antitrust regulator is investigating green claims made by the British arm of Unilever, saying it wants to ensure that consumers aren't being misled by a company that has touted social responsibility as a selling point for goods ranging from shampoo to ice cream. Take a look.
The maker of Dove soap faces a probe over possible greenwashing. Household goods giant Unilever is under investigation by watchdogs in the UK. The Competition and Markets Authority says it wants to make sure shoppers aren't being misled. It says the move comes after an initial review uncovered concerns that the firm could be overstating how green some products are. Unilever said it was surprised and disappointed by the news. It denied all suggestion that it had made misleading claims and said it would cooperate fully with the probe. Shares in the firm fell in early trades on Tuesday. The CMA has been stepping up scrutiny of companies which make green claims. In January, it launched a wider probe, joining regulators in the US and Europe in cracking down on greenwashing. The watchdog says it has not yet launched official investigations into any other companies. It says possible outcomes of the Unilever probe include requiring operational changes or even taking the company to court.
We now slip into a short break. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Coming up next is a lot more on the other side.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey trap top civil and military officials. Counter honey trapping ops initiated by India. But gullible victims still caught in the web. Top military intelligence experts break down the web of deception. Colonel Hani Bakshi explains the phenomena of honey trap.
जहां पे भी आपको लगेगा, उनको लगेगा कि there is a person who is susceptible to women, who's making a lot of women friends on the social media. That is where they will make a spoof account and then start luring the person.
Colonel Pavitran Rajan decodes the psyche of the victim and the predator.
But when you go up the chain, no one enforces it to people at the top. That disciplinary regime and the security regime is not enforced at the top. And they usually have a public profile where it is much more easier to approach that person.
A News 9 special on how modern technology has added teeth to the ancient spying tactic.
Our story takes you inside Pakistan's honey trap machine.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now. BrahMos. Stealthy, lethal, precise. It flies at 3 times the speed of sound and cuts through a warship like a hot knife through butter. China's navy has threatened its neighbors, and they are turning to the BrahMos for protection. The Warship Killer. This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
The scale of the attack was something that we were surprised at. David Hadley was a double agent. The Americans did not want him to be fully exposed, so all that he probably shared with the Americans was not shared with us in terms of intelligence. If we had that, I'm sure that we would have been able to deal with the situation far better.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. French auto giant Renault revealed its decision to offload a 5% stake in Nissan, marking the initial phase of its intended divestment from the Japanese car maker. This move comes amid a long-standing partnership between the automakers, which is currently undergoing substantial restructuring, leading to a rebalancing of their relationship. Take a look.
Renault will sell a 5% stake in Nissan, the French auto giant announced Tuesday. It's the first stage of a planned disposal of its holding in the Japanese car maker. The automakers have a decades-long tie-up, but that is undergoing significant change with a rebalancing of their relationship. Renault said the move will reflect a loss of up to $1.62 billion on its initial investment. It's the first stage in the firm's efforts to reduce its Nissan stake to 15%, down from its current holding of around 43%. Renault and Nissan agreed in July to terms for a restructure of their alliance after months of negotiations. They said they aimed for a more pragmatic and agile partnership. Nissan said in a separate statement it had agreed to acquire the shares Renault was selling. The Japanese automaker said the acquisition will cost just under $825 million. Renault shares were down over 1% in early trade after briefly rising at the market open.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky encountered reluctance from key Republicans regarding increased military support against Russia. Despite this, he secured a commitment from the White House affirming US backing. Take a look.
A year ago, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky received standing ovations in the U.S. Congress in his first overseas trip since Russian troops invaded his country.
Ukraine is alive and kicking.
He was seen as a fierce defender of an underdog nation that had stopped Moscow's mighty army at the gates of Kyiv. And Congress approved more than $110 billion in military aid.
President Zelensky,
but a year later, Zelensky is back in Washington, and he's running into a wall of partisan gridlock. Instead of addressing joint sessions of Congress, he met behind closed doors with lawmakers on Tuesday. Congress has approved no new assistance for Kyiv since a Republican majority took power last January. Republicans have been reluctant to sign off on a funding request from Democratic President Joe Biden. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson said after meeting with Zelensky that Biden's administration must provide more detail about how the money would be used.
What the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed.
Meanwhile, the clock is ticking down. The White House told Congress earlier this month the government will no longer have funding to provide more weapons for Ukraine after the end of the year. Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Ukraine needed the assistance as soon as possible.
He needs the aid quickly. If we don't give the aid quickly, several things will happen. First, the military needs, but second, Europe and many other allies will say, what is going on here? They're not giving them the aid. Thank you.
There are just 3 days before Congress recesses for the year on Friday, and Republicans in the House have refused to pass a spending package that contains $61.4 billion in Ukraine aid, unless it also includes funding to stop migrants from crossing the southern U.S. border. Bolstered by billions of dollars in U.S. arms, humanitarian aid, and intelligence, Ukraine was able to fend off Russia's initial attempt to sweep the country. But Kiev failed to break through Russian defensive lines in a major counteroffensive push this year, and Russia is now on the offensive in the east.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin joined forces to address a critical issue. The Biden administration has cautioned Congress about the repercussions of not renewing military aid to Ukraine, highlighting the potential for this failure to tip the scales in Russia's favor, posing significant national security risks for the West. A proposed aid package for Kyiv remains stalled by congressional Republicans, prompting warnings from the White House that without swift action, Ukraine could face a depletion of previously allocated aid by year's end, just as it braces for another challenging winter of conflict.
The whole world is watching us, observing what destiny other free nation could face to live freely or to be subjugated. Ukrainians haven't given up and won't give up. We know what to do, and you can count on Ukraine, and we hope just as much to be able to count on you. When the free world hesitates, that's when dictatorships celebrate and their most dangerous ambitions ripen. Every one of you here understands what it means for a soldier to wait for munition, waiting for weeks, months without knowing if support will come at all. Every one of you with command experience knows what it means when instead of moving forward, you are just watching, waiting for armor or equipment while your enemy is satisfied and preparing for assaults. Any of you with a son or daughter in combat zone just wouldn't get it if they were told that protecting lives could wait because there's a little more debating. Let me be frank with you, friends. If there's anyone inspired by unresolved issues on Capitol Hill, it's just Putin and his sick clique. They see the dreams come true when they see the delays or some scandals, and they see freedom to fall when the support of freedom fighters go down. And people like Putin shouldn't even hope to conquer freedom. And we can show our children, grandchildren, what real confidence is, as was shown to us when in Berlin the great words were spoken: tear down this wall. We need no less confidence now than President Reagan had then. Putin must lose so that everyone else who sees Russia's war on Ukraine as his personal lecture at the so-called University of Aggression gets the message loud and clear: Putin must lose.
Australia has announced stricter visa regulations for international students and low-skilled workers, aiming to halve migrant intake over the next 2 years. Visa rules for international students and low-skilled workers will also be tightened under the new plan. Here's a full report.
Australia says it's tightening visa rules for international students and low-skilled workers. The country said Monday that decision could cut its migration intake in half over the next 2 years and fix what the government called a broken migration system. Australia had boosted its migration numbers after COVID-19 to help businesses fill staffing shortages. However, the sudden surge in students and workers ratcheted up pressure on an already tight rental market, with homelessness on the rise. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill.
We are going to make sure that we bring numbers back under control, that we build a better planned system around essential things like housing, and perhaps most importantly of all, that we build a program that delivers for the national interest.
O'Neill said the surge was mainly driven by international students, a group that was kept out of the nation for almost 2 years because of the pandemic. Under the new policies, international students would need to score higher on English tests. There would also be more scrutiny if they want to prolong their stay after their studies end. The decision came after net immigration was expected to have peaked at a record 510,000 people between 2022 and 2023.
Back to sustainable levels.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese over the weekend said Australia's migrant numbers needed to go back to a, quote, sustainable level. A recent survey for an Australian newspaper showed that almost 2/3 of voters said the country's migration intake was too high. Still, Australia is now one of the world's tightest labour markets and has long relied on immigration to bolster it. The Labour government has pushed to speed up the entry of highly skilled workers and smooth their path to permanent residency.
Japanese court handed down a verdict, finding 3 ex-soldiers guilty of sexually assaulting a female colleague. Now, this decision marks a significant victory for the victim whose pursuit of justice challenged societal taboos in a traditional male-dominated culture. Take a look.
A Japanese court found 3 former soldiers guilty of sexually assaulting a female colleague on Tuesday. The victory marks the end of a long battle for victim Rina Gonoi, whose fight for justice challenged taboos in the country's traditional male-dominated society. 24-year-old former Self-Defense Forces member Gonoi's case relates to an incident in 2021 during her time in the army. She says she was pinned down by 3 male colleagues who pulled her legs apart and pressed their crotches against her in a simulation of a sex act. The defendants deny that their acts amounted to sexual assault. Gonoi spoke to reporters outside the district court in Fukushima.
I think it was good for Japan's society that the court handed down a guilty verdict and admitted the claims that I've made from the very beginning. The verdict shows that it's not okay to do things for a laugh, that such acts are an actual crime. I hope the defendants think about what they did and reflect deeply on their actions.
The men, aged from 29 to 31, seemed to show little expression as the judge read out his verdict. They were each given a suspended sentence of 2 years. Gonoi says she was subjected to persistent harassment after enlisting in 2020. She complained to her superiors at the time of the 2021 incident, but later decided to leave the army when no action was taken. Gonoi went public with her accusations in 2022, a rare move in Japan's conservative society, where speaking out against sexual violence has remained largely taboo. Japan's defense ministry then issued a public apology. The ministry also announced that 5 men connected to the incident had been dismissed and 4 others punished. It also began a widespread survey of harassment in the military and its linked entities, which found more than 1,400 complaints. Gonoi is also seeking damages for the alleged assault and the subsequent inaction despite her complaints, in a civil case against her former peers and the government. The cases come at an awkward time for Japan, which is trying to recruit more female soldiers into its forces and build up its military, an effort to deter an increasingly assertive China and nuclear-armed North Korea.
Today marks the 22nd year since the tragic 2001 Parliament attack in India. Leaders including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Home Minister Amit Shah, Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla gathered to solemnly pay tribute to the martyrs who valiantly protected the Parliament House. Congress leaders Mallikarjun Kharge, Sonia Gandhi, Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary, among others, also paid floral tributes in remembrance of those who made the ultimate sacrifice during this devastating terrorist attack. Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorists and Jaish-e-Mohammed outfits attacked the Parliament complex on the 13th of December 2001, killing about 9 people. Total of 5 terrorists were gunned down by the security forces. Today marks the 22nd year since this tragic incident was witnessed in India. The attack was carried out by 5 armed assailants, and it led to the death of 6 police personnel, the Delhi police personnel, 2 Parliament security service personnel and 1 gardener. On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of the Bulletin. We leave you with a documentary. Pakistan is training women as intelligence operatives to entrap influential Indians, soliciting confidential information in exchange for sexual favors. Now, experts caution defense personnel and scientists against virtual romantic involvement and call for heightened government monitoring of SIM card sales, of Indian SIM card sales. Take a look at our exclusive documentary.
I recently received a friend request from Mahira Sharma. Now, we seem to have a lot of friends in common on social media, particularly from the